Welcome to the Dynasty One podcast. I'm your host, Carl Safchick, and tonight I am joined by Wilson Jr., and that's Eric Carter. How you doing tonight, Eric?
I assumed that's where this was going because literally
I have a reason for it.
30 seconds before you said, hey, what was that show with Tim Allen? Home Improvement. Okay, what was the neighbor's name? Wilson. Are you sure?
I have a reason. It's because we're essentially neighbors, and yet I never see your face.
You're not missing much in that regard. Just my wife.
We live like a half hour apart. We work and we both work in DC now. And yet I've only met you one time. But one thing I want to bring up from the night we met each other, I remember one thing specifically that you told me is that you said, I've been holding something in for a while, and Eric Decker is actually a good player.
Yeah. God, how long ago was that?
That was 2 years ago, I think.
The last time he played,
no, that was last year. That was when James came up for the Eagles-Redskins game, or came across the pond. And Eric Decker just got released, moments before the show.
I feel like
a lot of
moments.
moments.
Into something here.
What's that?
I feel like you're segueing into something here.
Yeah. So what do you think about Eric Decker getting released? Where would you like to see him end up?
So I was kind of looking through the teams, and obviously, with the exception of San Francisco, I would say, depending on your feelings on Pierre Garçon, most everybody has an alpha.
I know you have feelings on Pierre.
I do have. I have very strong feelings on Pierre Garçon. I think most teams have an alpha receiver for the most part. So I was looking at spots where I thought he would fit, and let me know what you think about this one. I think he would fit great with the Falcons because they have Julio, who we know is a total beast, but he can kind of do different things than Eric Decker can do. Other than that, they have Mohamed Sanu, Taylor Gabriel, and you and I both like Austin Hooper, but he's a second-year tight end who didn't do a ton in his first year, and Matt Ryan can throw the ball. So I actually think he would complement Julio really well, and then to a lesser extent, I would like to see him on the Colts because they have T.Y. Hilton, again, who does things that Eric Decker can't do, and my boy Jack Doyle, who I like. Otherwise, it's a whole lot of what if on that roster. And he would be a stabilizing force, I think, for Andrew Luck, because last I checked, that O-line still isn't good, and Eric Decker can run those possession routes and really help him out. But those were the landing spots that kind of really called to me. I had Dallas as an honorable mention, but I just think he and Dez do a lot of very similar things. So I don't think I would like that quite as much.
I like Atlanta from a fantasy football standpoint, but I don't think it's too realistic with the money that they gave Mohamed Sanu last year, the money that they already have tied up in Julio Jones, the fact that they want to get Taylor Gabriel the ball more. They have two-headed running back. You're right, both of us do like Austin Hooper. I think a lot of what he didn't do last year, one, was being a rookie tight end, and two, being behind Jacob Tamme for the first 8 to 10 games of the year, something like that. As far as the Colts go, I think it's funny that you bring that up. If you remember, there were reports that he had signed in Indianapolis right before he signed with the New York Jets. There were reports that they weren't going to let Eric Decker leave the building, and in fact, I had written, it wasn't posted, but I had written an Eric Decker to the Colts instant analysis article that night, submitted it to my editor at the time, Ken Kelly. And he said, all right, in the morning, this will probably be up. As soon as they announce it, this will be up. And I had to write a whole new article. I could see Dallas. That's a fine honorable mention. They are willing to spend money. Why not the Chiefs? The Chiefs need an alpha.
They were rumored. I mean, I guess they came out today and they said that in addition to the salary concerns, which we know that they do have, they did say that they were a little bit concerned that Macklin's play was slipping. I mean, if they had maybe just what would they be willing to pay him? I guess if salary was a large part of the reason why they cut Macklin, I don't see. I agree with you; it's a good landing spot, but much like Atlanta, that's in theory. Because if they just cut a veteran receiver who is, I think Macklin and Decker are probably fairly similarly talented. If when they're both healthy, I think that's fair to say. Would you agree?
Yeah, sure. Maybe Decker a little more so.
So I mean, if they just cut a guy like Macklin, I have a tough time seeing him like immediately going out and finding his replacement as the only other veteran receiver who got cut at this point in time.
The Chiefs have over 11 million in cap space, which isn't a lot, but it's not nothing.
Have they signed all their rookies yet?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I believe they signed Mahomes, which is probably the biggest signing, as far as the most money allocated to him. So I would think that they would have a little bit of money to spend.
I mean, it could happen. That would just be crazy. Let's cut Jeremy Maclin. And, obviously they had no idea if Eric Decker was going to come on the market and be like, oh yeah, let's go pick up Eric Decker though. That just seems bizarre to me.
I don't see Mahomes' contract on here. So maybe he is not signed.
Yeah. I feel like I read something, maybe it was even just someone tweeting that a large part of the reason why they cut Maclin was to get those rookies under contract. But I don't want to put out fake news that I'm not overly certain about.
Okay. You don't want to put out fake news. That's what you got to do nowadays. Just put out a little fake news. Yeah. See how the people react to it. What about the Redskins?
Too many cooks in the kitchen, I think.
Yeah. I wouldn't disagree with that. And also, there's been talks that the Ravens are even still interested in him, despite signing Maclin.
Well, let's segue to that, and I have some feelings on that as well. So I do like the landing spot for Maclin. This is like, I think if you've read any 5 stats this offseason, this is probably one of them, which is the amount of targets that the Ravens have lost from last season, which is 345. And I like it because he can play in the slot, whereas neither Perriman nor Mike Wallace really do that. What's interesting is we haven't actually seen the particulars of this deal yet. At least I haven't as of the time we were recording. And they say it's a 2-year contract, but it would not shock me at all if it winds up being like one of those 1-year contract with what essentially amounts to a team option for year 2. But I do like the spot. They were a bit more of a throw first offense last year, maybe by necessity. But I want to talk about Brashad Perriman because everyone is saying like, oh, this is a huge shot across the bow of Brashad Perriman. And I don't really agree with that because unless there was some good old boys inside, analysis network, the Ravens had no idea that guys like Jeremy Maclin and Eric Decker were going to be available. They did, however, go through an entire NFL draft, 7 rounds in a draft, and not pick up any competition for either Brashad Perriman or Mike Wallace. So I do 100% agree that it makes Perriman's immediate situation worse, but I don't think it's really much of, it doesn't really move his dynasty value a ton for me, if that kind of makes sense to you. I thought he showed enough in what was essentially his first year. And then before these guys became available, he was looking like he was going to be the 1A or the 1B on that offense. So I still could see him, easily like doubling his targets from last year. Maybe not quite that, but maybe like in the range of like 85 to 100 targets, I think is reasonable.
Well, and I think you make a good point, which I hadn't thought of, but which is obvious now that you bring it up is this move doesn't mean that the coaching staff was down on Perriman. They had plenty of time to bring in free agent wide receivers. They had plenty of time to draft people. Maclin just became available. And they took a shot at him. That's a good point. I do have Brashad Perriman in one league, a league in which I have been wanting to trade him for a while, but I've thought that the perfect timing has not come yet. And obviously you don't come across owning a player by accident. I traded for him because I liked him at his price point. I actually traded Quincy Enunwa for him, like after those 3 really big Quincy Enunwa games. But yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad that you pointed that out.
Yeah, we'll definitely see. What do you have, about 500-ish yards last year? That's not bad for a rookie year. I mean, I don't want to derail our conversation here, but we got so spoiled by the class of 2014. And since then, we've only seen guys like Amari Cooper, maybe Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs. We're probably like the only 3 over the past couple of years who came in as rookies and were fantasy viable. Like generally, these things take time. I
have 2 quick, now that I'm looking, teams that I could also like Eric Decker going to the Seahawks, which is probably less reasonable considering their cap space. And what about the Bears?
I did think about the Bears, and part of what I did was I look at a guy like Eric Decker, and I imagine part of his equation is wanting to play for a good team. So that's kind of why I ruled the Bears out.
That's fair. Yeah, I like that. Part of wanting to play for a good team can be offset by the Bears' $26 million in cap space.
Yeah,
but
that's for sure. But you're forgetting they have mega stud Kevin White, who we're going to touch on in a little bit.
We'll talk about him in a minute. All right, I wanted to talk about this quick hits article we just put out. First, we'll start with I think you, Jesse, and I both contributed. Am I missing anybody, or was it just
I think it was
three?
just that fantastic trio you mentioned.
Okay. First, I want to hit on your guys. So basically, our editor-in-chief, Jacob Gell, wanted us to just come up with a hot take. And I think the only caveat was we actually had to believe it could happen. Not that it necessarily will happen, but that it could happen. And that we would stand behind it. So, a lot of hot takes are like the Skip Bayless type, like I'm just going to say words and hope people get outraged. These are things that we think actually can happen. So why don't we talk about your guy first? You want to tell us about yours?
Yeah, so I went with my hot take, and I try not to be too much of a hot take artist. Obviously, we feel strongly every now and again. I look back at some of the things I said, and maybe putting like Andre Ellington in like my top 12 running backs was probably a hot take that didn't work out so well, even though I thought it actually made sense and I stood by it. This one I think makes a lot more sense, and it's about my boy Pierre Garçon, who you touched on earlier. My hot take was that he will be a PPR wide receiver 1 this year, and there are a multitude of reasons that I believe this. He's done it before. I know it's only one time, but he was the wide receiver. I believe it was 11 a couple of years ago. He fell off.
He might have been higher than that.
From what I remember was in the article, I think I had wide receiver 11.
Okay.
Because he just didn't score the ball. He had a lot of receptions and yards, but he didn't score a lot of touchdowns. And he fell off a little bit, but last year he was pretty strong again. He was a wide receiver 22. So you might think, okay, that's still pretty far off, but literally there is no one else to throw the ball to there in San Francisco. And Brian Hoyer is not a great quarterback, and probably an average quarterback would be generous, but he can get the ball to his wide receiver 1, and they're going to be playing from behind a lot. He's with Kyle Shanahan again. They paid him, which I know isn't the be-all, end-all, but when a 31-year-old wide receiver is getting $17 million guaranteed, that tells me they have some designs for the guy. So, yeah, I don't think it's particularly crazy. I think I'm going to stand by this, and I actually did a dispersal draft earlier this season and picked him in, I guess, what would have been like the 7th or 8th round. So I am putting my money where my mouth is here that he will be a wide receiver 1.
He had 182 targets the year, and you were correct. He was the wide receiver 11. Last year, he was a wide receiver. You said 22. I have 23 according to my math. And only had 114 targets. On a team like the San Francisco 49ers, who will be playing behind a lot, I don't know if 182 targets is within reason. It probably is, but he should see a big uptick from 114 last year, in which he was the wide receiver 23. He only scored 30, right around 30 less points than Michael Crabtree, the wide receiver 12. So with that uptick in targets, I could definitely see another 30 fantasy points from him. I don't think that's unreasonable at all.
And I just don't remember the last time we've seen a depth chart this barren. Carlos Hyde is probably the best running back, but he doesn't really catch passes. My guy,
I think, is the best running back.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a good point. I do see him like getting 60 to 70 targets in that offense.
Yeah. At least in fantasy, he could lead that team in fantasy points from the running back position. I know that sounds crazy.
I love Vance McDonald, but obviously the team doesn't. They were trying to trade him. And look at these other wide receivers. Bruce Ellington, Marquise Goodwin, Jeremy Curley. That is atrocious.
Yeah.
So, Garçon is just going to run train in that offense.
Wait, what?
You've never heard that phrase before?
I have, not referred to in like for a football player.
That just happened.
I've heard,
All up on you.
I've heard run trade. Not
All the things.
to-
So you can say Jaguars, and I'm going to own this one, but I say a common colloquialism, and
I don't
suddenly
think that's-
you're beat
is that
red cracking up in me.
Please tweet us and let us know if you've heard run train referred to as anything else than the sexual connotation.
Come on.
That's the only way I've ever heard it
role
used.
models right now. Augie Farks, I'm going to run train on these chicken fingers.
But I think that was
Good God.
satirical. Like that was okay. Anyway, Jesse is buying John Brown. He said he could creep into the wide receiver one conversation. Michael Floyd's going. Larry Fitzgerald is getting over the hill. But John Brown was injured / sick. Is sick the word? I don't know. He was dealing with what?
Sick is part of sickle cell, so I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know how you would categorize it. What do you think about that? I think that couldn't qualify as hot takey for sure. But Jesse,
So I feel like he said he was referring more to value, and I could see that less than I could see him actually being like a PPR wide receiver one, because like dynasty owners are brutal. You cross them once, and I mean it's tough to bounce back from that. And we have some of these younger guys who've come in the league in the past couple of years. I mean, so here's the thing: we talked about a guy like Kevin White, who we're going to touch on again later. I guarantee you, if he has a good year and John Brown has 300 more yards, Kevin White will jump past him in ADP because he's Kevin White and he was a first round pick, and everybody wanted
Kevin
to love
White's
him.
already ahead of him in ADP currently.
Yeah, and probably like 4 years older than him too. So
They're about to. Kevin White's a little bit young. John Brown came in. John Brown came into the league at an older age too.
So I agree with from the way that I like to play. I could see that because I'm all about older guys. Like he would follow the Doug Baldwin trajectory, and Doug Baldwin I think is maxing out at like an ADP of 25 right now, which honestly, if you really think about it, is probably still too low.
Yeah.
So, but I feel like he's going to be following that type of trajectory.
Well, let's do this. When talking about John Brown, let's go back to his last healthy season. 101 targets, 65 receptions, over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. That's something that you would want out of a fourth-year wide receiver. Yeah. Well, soon to be a fourth-year wide receiver. I like Jesse's take. I think it qualifies as a hot take to say that he could creep up into the wide receiver one range, but also I think it's very plausible that could happen. The only thing that I don't know if Jesse was going to say that like John Brown could be like a wide receiver one in ADP. I don't see that happening, only because he's going to be 28 next year. So it would be really tough for him to creep in. But just as a value, as far as like you mentioned, Pierre Garçon, I think John Brown I think that's an excellent take by Jesse.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Carson Palmer, if the wheels are going to fall off or if he as well is going to run train.
All right. My hot take was that the 56-year-old rookie receiving record by tight end set by Mike Ditka in 1961 will be broken this year by David Njoku. What do you think about that?
I think you are out to fucking lunch on that. I just don't see it. I think there is way too much working against him. He's not the most polished guy. They're not dealing with the best quarterbacks in the league. And say what you will about Kenny Britt, and we combined have said a lot of things about Kenny Britt. I do think he's going to be the alpha in that offense, and Corey Coleman will be behind him. So unless they have like 3,000-yard guys, I just don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, Corey Coleman's still dealing with a hamstring injury currently right now, though. So I don't know how ready he will be. Those kind of scare me. I mean, Odell Beckham has performed with consistent hamstring soreness throughout his career. I like Corey Coleman. I like Kenny Britt. You're right about David Njoku being raw, but the team has next to no competition for him at the tight end position. People are talking up Seth DeValve, former 5th-round pick from the Browns. I just think that I think the opportunity is there for him to play a full role, like most snaps for the team, if he could catch one in training camp. I think the opportunity that's there hasn't been there for a long time for a lot of teams. I mean, Travis Kelce was injured his first year. Jordan Reed probably could have broke Mike Ditka's record if he didn't get injured as a rookie. Rob Gronkowski obviously came onto the scene with a little bit injuries in the beginning, and obviously was shared the tight end role with Aaron Hernandez. Zach Ertz was kind of behind Brent Selleck. Tyler Eifert was kind of behind Jermaine Gresham. So I haven't seen an opportunity this great. I mean, even Hunter Henry last year, for as good as a lot of people think he did, and he really didn't do that good outside of the 10 touchdowns, he was behind Antonio Gates. Think about how much better he could have been in a full-time role if the future Hall of Famer wasn't in front of him. I just think the opportunity is just awesome.
I think it's going to require a serious confluence of events. One of those receivers is going to have to get hurt. And they actually, I think, are an offense that likes to target their running backs quite a bit. Crowell and Duke Johnson had a number of passes caught between them. So that I think would have to taper off a little bit as well. And what's interesting is if the Browns improve, I think they should. I don't think they're going to be a good team, but they should improve. That will actually potentially hurt the fantasy prowess because they will not be playing from touchdowns behind all of the time.
All right, we've gotten to most of what I wanted to get to. The last thing I want to get to on the news and notes is we'll combine these two. Julian Edelman signs a 2-year extension. I'll ask this, is he once again being overlooked in dynasty leagues? But I want to combine that with our ADP twins. He and someone who we mentioned earlier, Kevin White, are almost identical twins. Kevin White has a 76.83 and Julian Edelman is around 77. Tell me what you think about Julian Edelman. Pair that up with Kevin White.
Yeah, so, I mentioned Doug Baldwin earlier, and Julian Edelman is basically Doug Baldwin plus 3 years. He's a guy who's always going to be undervalued because he wasn't appropriately valued when he was younger because he just came onto the scene a little bit later. It's not that big of a deal, but dynasty owners hate that. So now he's 31. He's not going to carry much in the way of value, probably anytime ever again. His efficiency was down a little bit last season, but he had a huge playoff run. Over the past 4 years, his weekly line is 6.5 catches, 70 yards, and 0.4 touchdowns. That's just a shade under 16 PPR points per game. And I think, we just talked hot takes, so here's a hot take for you. There's a non-negligible chance that Julian Edelman scores more points next season than Kevin White does for the rest of his career.
That's possible. I mean, with the injuries and everything, Julian Edelman was a wide receiver 15 last year.
Yeah.
And when Bill Belichick gives you a contract that he doesn't have to give you when they just signed other players at the position, I think that's worth noting.
So look at Kevin White's ADP too. We mentioned this. We kind of alluded to this last week when we were talking about Josh Doxson and how he needs to put up or shut up, or he's going to go the Kevin White path. And the Kevin White path is he missed his rookie season. Dynasty owners did not care. Last August, his ADP was still 23. So a 2nd-round sharp draft pick. He played in 3 games, missed the rest of the season. Now he's down at 77. So he's going to be in the triple digits at this time next year if he doesn't step it up. So Edelman's older. He's a better player. He's on the best team in football. And maybe this should matter. I don't know if it does. His Tinder game is much stronger.
Let me ask you this. Is there any scenario where you would prefer having Kevin White over Julian Edelman? Let's say you have 4 or 5 just stud wide receivers. Could you see yourself taking a shot on Kevin White's perceived upside rather than Julian Edelman's quote-unquote fixed ceiling?
I don't think so, because if you have 5 stud receivers ahead of Julian Edelman, that means other teams in your league would need Julian Edelman as a starting receiver. And you can make the argument.
Or vice versa. You could trade one of those.
Exactly. And you can make the argument, if you traded a guy like Edelman, it is ostensibly to a contender, and do you want to strengthen your contenders? Who the hell cares? Do what's best for your fantasy football team and let the cards fall how they will. Kevin White, we have to see something. He needs to have, I think, at least 850 yards, like 5-6 touchdowns, 70-ish receptions, and maybe he'll jump a round or two. At this point, the onus is on him to prove it.
Is it out of the realm of possibilities that Julian Edelman actually has a better season next year than he had last year with Martellus Bennett being gone? You can say Dwayne Allen's there, but I think Martellus Bennett is a better receiving threat. Adding Brandon Cooks doesn't really take away targets. Definitely, he's going to get the ball. He's going to move the ball downfield. And with only scoring 3 touchdowns, I do realize he plays that slot role, but you would think he'd be in for a little bit of positive TD regression.
Yeah, he's never been a huge touchdown scorer, but he's gotten, 5 to 7 touchdowns typically in his seasons. And, we talk about losing targets of Martellus Bennett. Now, of course, we have Cooks in. We have Gronk back healthy. So you could make the argument, okay, Edelman is going to lose targets, but maybe Chris Hogan just doesn't see the field, and maybe his targets go away. Maybe Malcolm Mitchell doesn't see the field, and maybe his targets go away. Their 3 best pass catchers are Cooks, Edelman, and Gronkowski. And it's arguable to say that maybe James White is number 4. So maybe it's just these other wide receivers who get off the field. Maybe Amendola doesn't get his 40 to 50 garbage targets. He's still gonna get his looks. He's the best slot receiver on the team.
Yeah, I think nobody else really plays that role that Julian Edelman plays. So you have Gronk and Cooks stretching the field, and it could conceivably open up underneath even more for Julian Edelman. I forgot to mention in the beginning of the show, we have Ray Summerlin coming on of rotoworld.com.
Do you think that Ray is going to run train on the show?
Oh, my God. We'll be back in just a second.
I feel like this is like common vernacular.
All right, we'll ask Ray. We'll ask Ray on air.
We got to take it to Urban Dictionary.
Well, Urban Dictionary is definitely going to agree with you. So the bartender gave me this fidget spinner.
Yeah, I've read about these things. I don't think I've ever actually seen one in action or know what they do.
Well, I get very fidgety when I do the podcast. So, I've just left it up here for, the past month.
Nice. I have from a kid that I've brought this thing with me. It's a little koosh turtle. I just kind of play with it when I'm podcasting. So I'm right there with you.
Where in DC do you work?
Well, I work in Rockville.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I actually only work 2 miles from where I live. It's super nice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You drive or?
Yeah, I do. It's just easier.
I just thought you might bike or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I thought about it. They reimburse for travel, but it's just so much easier to drive.
Right.
Yeah.
What's up, Ray?
Oh, there he is.
I wonder if he still has that Monopoly thing behind him.
I thought that disappeared last time.
Maybe it did. I think you're right. Uh-oh, sun's out, guns out. You're muted, I think.
Think you're on mute, Ray?
No, not on Google Hangouts.
Is the microphone input got to change?
His microphone.
Yeah, I have that same problem every time.
All right, how about that?
There we go.
Yep.
That's nonsense.
How you doing, buddy?
Living the dream, my friends. How are you guys doing?
Good to see you. Am I going to see you this year?
No, unfortunately. I have, I think we're all around the same age, so you know how weddings happen whenever you're our age, and so there will be a summer of weddings. And in fact, I think I have a bachelor party on the same weekend that Jake was saying he preliminary was thinking about doing it.
Are you doing that this year, Eric? I know you hadn't in the past because you were in Boston and stuff. But.
Yeah, no, I only did. Did one
you move?
Redraft. Yeah, I'm in Maryland now.
Oh, well, yeah, that's a great time to move to
actually.
Maryland when you can't play fantasy football anymore.
Yeah, right. I actually only do one redraft league, and it was through work. And I wasn't even going to do that last year, but someone randomly asked me my first week of work. It's oh, I heard you do football stuff.
Well, you know that Maryland, the restrictions are not that bad, and MFL just hasn't registered for MFL 10s.
I kind of heard about that. Yeah,
it's actually free for them to register. They just haven't done it.
Huh. Wow, that's not cool.
No, I'm fucking pissed. Like I've said something to them like publicly a couple times, and I'm like, and then you guys know John Proctor.
Yeah.
He told, and he's like a lawyer. He's like, dude, I'll do the paperwork for you and like send it to you, and you guys can sign it and then send it in. And they refused.
Well, that's weird. Why?
Yes, I don't know. I asked them why, and I got a really snarky response back.
I'd assume that there's some backstory there. Maybe they're worried about, I don't know, but if you said it's free. Because that's what happened. That's what happened with DFS in like New York. They were like, "Oh, but it'll be cool," and then they just kind of like flipped the tables and said, "No." So I don't know if maybe they're worried about getting into legal or like putting money in and then Maryland changing its mind. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but yeah,
that's weird.
From what I understand, agree.
That is weird.
All right, well, we're going to get you on, and I have a non-fantasy football question for you to start off.
Is that going to get me in trouble?
Maybe.
Is this a Facebook or Twitter thought for me?
We'll see.
Because you know that those are different things that I'm willing to think about on either social media platform.
Yeah. It's not political.
All right, that's good.
All right, now we're back, and we're joined by a good friend of mine, good friend of ours, Ray Summerlin from rotoworld.com. How you doing tonight, Ray?
I'm doing very well. It's great to be back with you guys. It's been a minute. It's been a while, I think, since I've been on here. I can't even remember when the last time.
It could have been last week. I would have forgot. I don't remember like the last time I was on the show. I go through and try to invite people on, and I'm like, wait, I had them on 2 episodes ago. Okay, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, it's first time this year, first time this spring. You're looking dapper over here with the full beard going now. I'm liking that. Everything's going great.
It was longer when the Caps were doing well in the playoffs.
Ah, I see. But that never lasts.
So you had a couple months to grow up back then.
Right. All right, Ray, we got a non-fantasy football question to start off for you. Actually, Eric, what you want to ask? So because
you're super adamant about it, so please.
I think I'm correct here.
All right, you go.
I just don't know how to phrase it. All right, I'll phrase it like this. Ray, when you hear the phrase "run train," what do you think about?
Absolutely not. There's no way.
So, Eric, what context did you use it in, Eric? Was it Pierre Garçon?
Pierre Garçon is going to run train on the 49ers offense next year.
Oh, man.
So it looks like I'm on the losing side of this one.
Yeah, Ray agrees with me.
I guess I just, if this is a common vernacular that I've been missing, that's my bad. I apologize to our Dynasty One listeners.
I could tell you do not peruse Urban Dictionary very often.
He wanted to use Urban Dictionary in his own defense.
Hold on. How can that be used in your defense?
That's what I said. If
I went to that entry in Urban Dictionary, it'd be very clear that was not an acceptable thing to be throwing around.
All right. Well, Ray, the reason we brought you on tonight, we're actually going. I didn't even open with the reason we were going to bring you on even earlier or now. The reason that you're on, we're going to do a 2-round Dynasty mock draft, but it includes only players drafted in the last 3 years of the NFL draft. So you could look at it as younger players. We could have done an age cutoff, but players like maybe Josh Doxson, a couple other guys might not have been on there. And since you are the guest, Ray, I'll give you first pick. Who was the most valuable player to you in Dynasty leagues who was drafted in the last 3 years?
First, before we get started, this was harder than I thought. As I was kind of thinking about players, you lose track. And I was thinking, oh, yeah, all those receivers. Oh, no, those are 2014 receivers. Yep. And so that gets stuck in your head. So I kind of started to lose track. I finally went just through the draft tracker and found players. And this first pick is actually kind of difficult. There are 2 guys. I'm going to go with Ezekiel Elliott, and I'm going to go with him over David Johnson. I think it's probably going to be the number 2 pick. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The first is that David Johnson's 26, or is going to be 26 in December. I don't think that's talked about a lot, but he's older than Le'Veon Bell, and that seems really crazy to think about. But he's a couple months older than Le'Veon Bell. And with Elliott, I think that there's room for growth. I don't think that the passing game usage last year is kind of indicative of what we're going to see. He should be better and be used more often in the passing game. We've talked about it this offseason. So I think that even though he's kind of got a inferior kind of touch ceiling to David Johnson, that age and kind of where I see him going. I'm going to go with Ezekiel Elliott, but I don't think with the first pick you're going wrong in this draft.
With you mentioning David Johnson's age, with him being older than Le'Veon Bell, do you prefer Le'Veon Bell to him?
See, that's one. I would say no, and I would say no because Le'Veon Bell has so many of those other concerns, and it's only 2 months. We're not talking about we're not talking about 3.5 years is what we're talking about with Elliott. We're talking about I really do think it's 2 months, maybe 3 months. So I wouldn't do that. I'd still take David Johnson. I think there are injury and off-field concerns with Bell that are kind of mitigating factors, but that 3.5 years, that's a big deal, I think.
Eric, I'll let you go second. Do you agree that David Johnson's the 102?
I agree that those should be the first two guys. I would actually prefer David Johnson, and I do agree about the age factor, but I've made the comparison before for David Johnson, and that is the Matt Forte career path, because even when he starts to maybe fizzle out a little bit as a between the tackles runner, he is arguably the best pass catching running back in the league. So even Matt Forte, the guy, had a bum wheel last year and he still wound up being an RB2, I think, at his age 31 season. And so if David Johnson has 3 more elite seasons, which I don't think is out of the question, Absolutely. And then 2 to 3 more, maybe now he has 125 to 150 carries, but he supplements that with maybe still getting those goal line touches and getting a ton of pass game work. I think Zeke can catch passes. We just haven't seen it yet, and we have seen it with David Johnson. So, I'm taking him at 102, and splitting hairs, he would be my 101 here.
And can I just say that I like to point this out with David Johnson. David Johnson is the player that we pray Christian McCaffrey becomes. And so I want to be very clear on what ceiling we're talking about, and he's hit that ceiling. So I agree with you completely. It is splitting hairs completely for me.
Yeah. It's not exactly splitting hairs for me. I'd rather have the top wide receiver of this group. I'd rather go Amari Cooper. And I get it. Both of those players are amazing. There's no saying that there's not. The value that wide receiver holds from year to year is just too much to pass up on. We saw last year with Todd Gurley, who was the consensus probably 101 in this type of draft last year. We saw that fade away. We've seen Le'Veon Bell, who could have been the consensus 101 the year before that. Despite playing well, he's losing ADP value. I want to, if I'm starting my roster, I want to start it with a wide receiver. I'll take Amari Cooper, and I would actually take him at the 101.
What's funny about that? I wouldn't have him. I don't mind the receiver point of view at all. I know exactly what you're saying. He's not my number one wide receiver.
Oh, okay. I just crossed off who I think you're going to pick, so now you have to pick him.
I'm picking Michael Thomas, obviously, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
To be fair, I was higher than most on Michael Thomas last year, and so I'm certainly not going to back off that now by any stretch of the imagination. Thomas does have concerns, and I want to make those very clear. Drew Brees is in a contract year. They signed Ryan Nassib on the day that we're recording this. So the future is not bright at quarterback. We don't know what they're going to do. Sean Payton seems to perennially be on the way out. So maybe this offense changes. But what you're looking at now is a guy that finished, I believe, is the wide receiver 9 in standard with Brandon Cooks there. He's got a huge target ceiling. He's a very good and ascendant player. And Amari Cooper, he's collapsed down the stretch the last 2 years. He was outscored by Michael Thomas last year with Brandon Cooks there. He has 11 total touchdowns in 2 seasons. He's been outscored by Michael Crabtree the last 2 seasons. Yeah. No one seems to want to mention that. The idea that Amari Cooper is safe, well, I understand it because he's a wide receiver. There might be a cap on his upside simply because of his inability, or at least to this point, the inability shown to score touchdowns in the red zone. And so I would pick Michael Thomas over him, and I'm happy to have him here in this format at this pick.
Eric, do you remember who else? I can't remember who else it was. It might have been Evan that said that Amari Cooper may have already reached his upside. I can't remember. I feel like you were on that episode.
I don't remember either, but I do agree. And just circling back to the first 2 picks, we've seen David Johnson prove the ability to be the best fantasy asset in any given year. And we've seen Zeke Elliott prove the ability to lead the league in rushing. We've seen Amari Cooper prove the ability to be a pretty good player, and maybe that changes. But we can't say that for sure. So I do think, though, those are the four. I think those are the top four picks, and I think it falls off a little bit here, and we're already hitting question marks, and I will hesitantly take Todd Gurley because of what we saw him do in year one. I think he's a better player than Melvin Gordon, even though Melvin Gordon is on that great San Diego offense, asterisk if they can stay healthy. Gurley, I think he's more the guy we saw as a rookie than we saw last year. And the Rams, they brought in some better caliber coaches. They brought in some players. Even if this year is not great, I mean, he was a running back 2 last year, which is not what you expected, but he didn't fall completely off the radar. So he's young. I think he's still going to be up there, and I'll take him again, very hesitantly at number 5.
I agree that those top 4 are the top 4 for me. I want to circle back to Amari Cooper really quick and just say that he is over a year younger than Michael Thomas.
Yeah.
So while he's been in the league an extra year, he's over a year younger. But moving on from that, this is where I have to kind of reach. Yeah, I agree. Melvin Gordon's up there. You have Jordan Howard and the other 2 running backs. Again, I'm just not willing to spend this would be kind of early second round startup pick, early to mid startup pick. But if we're just going this high, I just want another wide receiver. And I'm going to reach just a little bit. I'm going to take Corey Davis, who's going to be the de facto wide receiver 1 for Marcus Mariota for years to come. With being a rookie, we don't see what that upside is yet, but I think you're looking at, reaching for the stars for those guys. And Ray, being a Titans fan, if I remember correctly, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Corey Davis.
Well, I love him as a player, first and foremost. I also think he's a perfect fit for Marcus Mariota. I think he's that guy that can get open quickly, that can be open, right underneath where he needs him, and then create after the catch, which is something that I think is going to be huge for Mariota. And I love that pick. But what I will say is I think that when you get to this part of the startup, maybe a little bit further down than where we are now, but when you get to this part of startup, this is where I find veterans become value because people like to reach for rookies. And so even though I love Corey Davis, I agree with you completely. And if I'm taking a wide receiver, he would actually be my next wide receiver. I would rather have Melvin Gordon or Jordan Howard or Jay Ajayi. I think that they are – I've never said Ajayi right. Did I just say Ajayi right?
I don't know how to pronounce the Redskins' new running back. I can pronounce it, but never on the first try.
There you go.
I think you said Ajayi, right?
I never know if I'm saying it. But anyway, so that guy from Miami – those guys I think offer a little bit more value, and I'll take Melvin Gordon, who I agree with you that there's a top 4 here. I don't know how far he is back from that. And what I liked about Melvin Gordon last year is when he was scoring touchdowns early. I have a famous tweet that got a lot of responses a couple weeks later about how Melvin Gordon was scoring cheap fantasy points, and I wanted good players to score fantasy points. And then Melvin Gordon turned good, and it made that tweet look terrible. Which fine and dandy, it happens. It happens to everybody. That offensive line has a chance to be much better depending on how Forrest Lamp and Dan Feeney can be early. Of Russell Okung, I'm kind of hesitant in that whole situation. Like all of the San Diego offense, I'm having a hard time with. It's kind of an unknown situation, new coach with an offensive mind. Ken Whisenhunt's still there. What's the run-pass split going to be? What's the target split going to be? But I still think Melvin Gordon's going to get his touches. They didn't add anybody. And I'll take him and just hope he gets, 15 touchdowns again.
He was one of the big winners from the NFL draft, in my opinion. Eric, there's still a lot of really good running backs left on the board. I'm assuming that's where you're going.
Well, so this is really interesting because there are a lot of very highly touted running backs. And for someone who's really come around on running backs, this might be a little bit surprising and probably seem like a little bit of a reach. I'm actually going to take Stephon Diggs here. Wow. He hasn't put up the raw numbers. He missed some time last year. He came on late as a rookie and had I think 4 or 5 really good games in a row, then fizzled out a little bit again. But I think he was just shy of 1,000 yards last year. And the Vikings offense is not a good offense. I think that he does have the skills to be, like a 1A type of wide receiver. And I just think I trust in him a little bit more than, and again, maybe this is my inherent veteran bias, than I do for some of these guys who haven't even taken a snap yet.
I really love Stephon Diggs. I liked him when he played for Maryland. I thought I didn't really understand why he dropped to the 5th, and that scared me off from buying him, which it just shouldn't have. I should have stuck to what I believed in. And you said the Vikings offense isn't that good. They played okay in spurts last year. Teddy Bridgewater could be coming back. I don't know if that's the answer. I'm a big Teddy Bridgewater fan. I don't know that he's that much better than Sam Bradford, but if Bradford struggles, you have an amazing backup. You have one of the league's best backups, in my opinion. And you're going to force me. I was trying to pick between Stephon Diggs and this player, but you made the decision.
Well, can I bring the hate on Diggs? Because apparently I have to bring the hate.
No, you're not allowed.
I'm not allowed?
No, go ahead.
I have him, like, I don't have him even as the best receiver available. I am very low on Stephon Diggs. I feel that he is a poor man's Amari Cooper in that his ceiling, he may have already hit it. He's very inconsistent. I believe he has more games with under 4 fantasy points than double-digit fantasy points in his career, and it's like 11-8. 7 of his last 9 games last year, he didn't have more than 8 PPR points. Like, it hasn't been happening for him. We all want it to happen. He has those big games. We think, oh, it's coming, and then it never comes. And the reason he fell to the 5th round is because he was hurt at Maryland. He had injury issues at Maryland, and he's been hurt again in the NFL. I think there's a lot of risk for Stephon Diggs, and I don't know what the upside is, especially in that offense with a guy playing next to him that they just paid and another guy who they drafted with a first-round pick. And then, by the way, Kyle Rudolph, who's eating up 22% of the targets. So I don't know. I'm much lower on Diggs. That could end up being very foolish. I recognize that because he has had those big explosions, but I can't see it there for him.
He makes a lot of plays, and that could creep into a little bit of my own bias of, you watch highlights rather than game film. He makes spectacular plays.
Absolutely.
And I'm curious to hear when it gets to it, who you would have above him from the receiver standpoint, because there's a lot of guys that I see that you could pick. I'm going to take my first running back here, and I'm going to take Christian McCaffrey. He would be my 102 in this rookie class behind Corey Davis. I just like where he went. I know, Eric, I know you like Jonathan Stewart. I do too, but he's on the back half of his career, if not back quarter or back 10th of his career.
18th hole for sure. Maybe the 19th. Maybe he's in the clubhouse already.
Frank Gore says hi.
Yeah, but that's been said about Jonathan Stewart for a long time, and Eric has faithfully said that not today. Look at that and say not today. But I really like Christian McCaffrey. I think that he will be overlooked by some people. I know this sounds really, I don't know if ignorant's the right term. He's going to be overlooked by some people because he's a white running back. He is actually, in fact, very athletic. He catches the ball out of the backfield, something that short yardage has not been Cam's forte, but it could be. And they don't have a lot of great receiving options outside of Greg Olsen right now, so he could turn into a PPR monster. So I will take my first running back, go off the board with Christian McCaffrey.
And you're preaching to the choir with me with McCaffrey. I love McCaffrey. In fact, he's my 101 in rookie. I like him ahead of Davis. I love McCaffrey. I love his skill set. I think he's gone to a creative offense that clearly they drafted Curtis Samuel. They plan to run an interesting offense. And so I'm all in on that. By the way, I'm all in on Curtis Samuel too. I know I'm higher on him than most people as well. And this is what I was talking about with Melvin Gordon. I love these rookies, but I'm going to take the veteran guys. And so I will take Jordan Howard, who is going to get hit with the unproven label. That's going to happen, by the way, in redraft. It's so confusing to me. 14 games of running back 7 production, running back, I believe he's running back 6, actually, running back 7 in PPR. In football, that's enough. That's enough to show who this guy is. I have some concerns from a dynasty perspective because I think this coaching staff could be blown up. And Jordan Howard is a zone guy, and Chicago has really built their offense around that. What happens if a new coach comes in? We have to see. But I absolutely love Jordan Howard. Even if he just gives you one more season of elite production. Where you're getting him, I think at startups, I like him quite a bit.
Ray, do you have an opinion as to why he lasted till the 5th round? We mentioned why Stephon Diggs lasted to the 5th round. Why did Howard go that late?
I think that I'm trying to remember his testing numbers. I don't think he tested great, and he looked like a one-dimensional running back. He looked like a guy that was just north-south and was going to finish. And I've said it. I'll continue to say it. Derrick Henry was in his class, but nobody finished a run like Jordan Howard in that draft class. He lowered his shoulder and finished. I think people kind of viewed him that way, and they got him in there in the zone. And by the way, all credit to Pro Football Focus. Pro Football Focus identified Howard and said, this is a zone back. You get him in a zone system, he's going to be very good. And look what they did. So I think that was the deal. People didn't really see what he could be, and the Bears ended up getting a steal.
Yeah, and I was going to take him if you didn't. So that kind of forces my hand into Leonard Fournette, who, as we know, was the first running back taken in this draft. And it will be determined if he can catch passes. We will see. We've seen that he didn't do it at LSU. He didn't look overly natural at the combine, in my opinion. And then the reports, and granted, this is just the offseason puffery, that supposedly he's been looking good catching passes. And there was a rumor today, I think, on Roto World about TJ Yeldon possibly getting cut. I think that might have come from a beat reporter. So that would be interesting, because that might suggest, well, Chris Ivory is not going to be catching passes, so someone's going to have to. So if that were to come to fruition, then I think, maybe this guy is not going to be as one-dimensional as people seem to have pigeonholed him as, and he's going to get the volume. You don't take a guy that high if you're not going to give him the volume. So, yeah, I feel I don't want to call anyone like a faller, because we have a lot of good players here, but as the 11th guy here, I'm pretty happy with that.
Who did you just take? Ajayi?
It's like he's in his own world right now.
You took Ajayi, right?
Yes, I took Leonard Ajayi.
Oh, hey, you just want to talk about the blue-white game? He's not even he's not even paying attention.
Okay, my bad. I'm back. I'm back. I'm going to say somebody that we mentioned. I even crossed off Leonard Fournette. Okay.
And now you have to take Jay Ajayi. So
yeah. No, I'm not taking Jay Ajayi. I am now taking Corey Coleman. I'm really buying into everything that the Browns are doing right now. I will buy pretty much everybody on the Browns offense in fantasy. Kaiser's still going pretty low in rookie drafts. Eric, you mentioned earlier, Kenny Britt can be had for pretty cheap. Corey Coleman, I like his price right now. I like everything that the Browns are doing, and there's still this negative Browns bias despite all the awesome moves that they're doing. Go say anything nice about the Browns on Twitter. I'm sure you guys have tried, and you'll get like 20 egg avatars telling you, yeah, but it's the Browns.
Yeah. And
it's like, wait a second. Have you seen what they've done the past 2 years? They are almost in compete mode right now.
Yep.
I'm going to be, I don't know what the odds are. I think I saw the other day it was really slim, but I'm going to be putting some bets in for them to win the division. Obviously, I don't think it will happen. I just think that the odds makers aren't giving them enough credit.
The Cubs won the World Series. You can't say anything about like, oh, but it's insert X team here. It's over. It's done.
Except for Washington sports.
Yes, right, obviously. Absolutely. Yeah, it is cursed.
So that's who I'm going to go with. What do you think about that, Ray?
I agree. He was one of the people I would have taken ahead of Diggs. I agree 100% about the Browns. I actually just finished writing our team report for the Roto World magazine, which will be in newsstands in like 2 months. Pick it up. There's a plug. But but I just finished writing the Brown notes. It's basically a love note. They are a quarterback away. That is what that offense is. Their offensive line, they brought in Treader. They bought in Kevin Zeitler. That offensive line is going to be better if they can figure out right tackle. I wish they would have kept Barnage, but David Njoku is a good projection. They seem to really like Seth DeValve, which I think is maybe one of the reasons they were comfortable getting rid of Barnage. You mentioned Kenny Britt and Corey Coleman. I do worry that Kenny Britt's going to be the one, and that's going to hurt Corey Coleman this year, but obviously Corey Coleman's the future that you want. It's all there. Their backfield, Crowell and Duke Johnson. I like both of those guys. It's all there. I agree with you completely, and I'm not afraid to admit it. So I'm just going to keep grabbing veteran running backs. How's that sound for everybody? I'll go ahead and take Jay Ajayi. I know that the knee is a concern. It's a big concern, but they've talked about using him more in the passing game. They've talked about how good he looks. If he gives you 2 years of running back one production, that's pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and take Ajayi and say, keep taking those rookies, and I'll keep taking those veterans, and we'll see what happens.
You were big on Ajayi coming out, weren't you? That's his rookie year.
Absolutely, I was. I loved him. I have him still on, I think, 2 of my 3 dynasty teams. I have him because I was so high on him. So I'm liking life now. It didn't look pretty after that rookie year, but I'm liking life now.
I remember a certain podcast that I used to listen to with you in it. That was one of my favorites to listen to all the time. I know you guys waxed poetically about Ajayi.
Old Rummy liked him too. I'm pretty sure about that.
For my first pick in the second round, I'm going to go with, well, apart from Ray's constant digs on me, this is going to be the guy who's probably going to be viewed as the reach of the draft right now. And this is a guy we talked about quite a bit last week. That's the freak Tyreek Hill. I'm going to go ahead and take him here.
The other one I would have had above Diggs. So no, you will not hear anything from me about that.
Yeah, I don't think that's. I mean,
just looking by the ADP, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other guys ahead of him. But as you mentioned last week, Carl,
that was pre-match. Really.
I mean, the stars are just aligning, and they said today that they're going to take him off kickoff switch. Maybe is not a big deal, but it shows that's because they're expecting him to do more in the passing game. So I just think that everything has fallen into place for him this offseason. He was dynamic as a rookie. I talked about him probably too much last week. So I'm putting my metaphorical money where my mouth is.
So I have the top guy on the board according to ADP as Joe Mixon. If I'm taking a running back there, it's probably not a running back from this class. I'll pass on Mixon. I'll pass on Cooks. I'll take Derrick Henry. I mean, I'm a huge DeMarco Murray fan, and I think he is still the alpha dog there. But Henry just has too much talent. And if we're talking dynasty, at some point, you throw situation out the window. You don't know if the guy in front of you is going to get injured. Pretty much every running back in the league right now is in a committee anyway. So you can't really throw out the fact that it's a good committee. Okay, well, so what? Duke Johnson's going to share touches with Isaiah Crowell. Dalvin Cook's going to share touches with Latavius Murray. There's still touches that are being taken away rather than the fact that Derrick Henry's getting taken touches away from him by a historically good running back. So I'll just bet on talent at this point, and I'll take Derrick Henry.
Yeah, and you tried to goad me into a DeMarco Murray bet last year, and I'm very glad I didn't take it because I was incredibly wrong about DeMarco Murray. And I will.
Who did take that bet, right?
Who took the bet?
Oh, you didn't know about that?
I didn't know. No, enlighten me.
We had your captain over there, Evan Silva. He had to chug a Mike's Hard Lemonade live on air. We have video and audio of Evan Silva chugging a Mike's Hard Lemonade on air.
Yeah, that probably wasn't his first of the day, if we're being honest about everything. But yeah, no, I was completely wrong on Murray. I take the loss on that completely. But I still agree with you. I think that's a good pick because Murray is not owed any guaranteed money after this year. He is 29. I believe he turns 30 sometime early next year, maybe. So if you're going to be buying on Derrick Henry, I think that this is the time to do it. I agree. I will take Joe Mixon just because I like that situation. I like that Jeremy Hill is both not very good and also in his contract year. Giovanni Bernard's coming back from an ACL. I think the role is there immediately for Mixon. And I also think that looking to the future, it's there. The offensive line is a train wreck. No one would say any different, but at least they have weapons now. If they can get that line fixed, I think that Mixon's in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, I love Mixon's landing spot. We had a article here at Dynasty One, a quick hitter article, maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, about best rookie running back landing spots. And I actually said, I think it'll be the Bengals, but I think they're going to take a late round guy. And then they took, if you spend a second round pick on Joe Mixon, you basically spent a top 10 pick on Joe Mixon. Yep. So yeah, they have plans for him. And Jeremy Hill's awful. Gio, he's a pass catcher. He might not be healthy. I'm with you 100% on that. I'm going to take a guy who I didn't see myself taking. Probably Carl saw himself taking, and that's Jamison Crowder. I think he's probably the best receiver left, and I look at him and stack him up to a guy like Mike Williams, and I sometimes like to play like the micro value game. And to me, the micro value game is Jamison Crowder in 2017 gains more value than does Mike Williams. We already are looking at Williams. He's got one of those mystery injuries that apparently hits a rookie every single year. And Crowder, meanwhile, they're saying he's the wide receiver too. He's going to be in 2 wide receiver sets. He's not just going to be a slot guy. So I see him having a good year, probably leading the team in receptions. And we talked a little bit about this last week, Carl, how his value, we thought it might be a little high. It could get higher if all this offseason puffery holds true.
Yeah, slot receivers are disrespected by the fantasy community in general. I mean, we're talking PPR here, so those points do matter. Slot receivers, while you can't really compare them as far as like efficiency metrics go, because they just play a different role. They play a different position than outside receivers. I know I got into this argument 1,000 times over the past couple of years when we're talking about Jarvis Landry. You can't compare efficiency metrics when you're talking about slot receivers. And as long as they're slot receivers and as long as they're going to catch 1,000 passes a year, they are worthwhile. I'm really at a loss here as to who to take. This is really getting tough for me.
I was going to say, like after I took Mixon, I was going to say this is a cutoff point. We talked about the top 4.
Yeah.
After you get after this, it gets really tricky at this point because I think you're kind of taking your chances. Eric, you took Jamison Crowder, which I have no problem with that whatsoever, and we'll see what happens. And I will raise my hand and say I'm one of the people who discount slot receivers, especially in Dynasty. So I will take that. But, you're just throwing darts at this point, and I might take a shot maybe on Doxson instead of Crowder. You never know, but you're at one of those weird spots here in this draft.
Yeah, they're a similar age, and if they're saying that they're going to put Crowder over Doxson in 2 wide receiver sets, that's all I need to know. I was a Doxson fan before the NFL draft. I had Corey Coleman as my top guy. I had Josh Doxson narrowly as my second guy. I was a fan of him before he landed there, but if he's not up to speed, at least mentally, now I could understand if he's not up to speed with his foot injury, but if he's not up to speed mentally with the offense, then that's a big sign for me. And they're playing Ryan Grant over Josh Doxson in 3 wide receiver sets currently.
That's a problem.
I'm gonna have to take a shot on one of these rookies now. That's just where we are in the draft. I'll go with Mike Williams. I think he's being disrespected at this point. Yeah, he has the injury. Yeah, he went to a team with a lot of receiving options. You got Keenan Allen, you got Tyrell Williams. You still have Travis Benjamin, who they gave money to last year, who played well when he was healthy last year. You have Inman, who I really like. You have Hunter Henry and the future Hall of Famer Antonio Gates. But again, kind of the same aspect as the Derrick Henry thought process is I'm just betting on his talent. And more often than not in Dynasty in the NFL, the cream rises to the top. And yes, he's probably not as good as some of the other players that were drafted in the top 7 wide receivers. You have your Julio Joneses and your AJ Greens and your Calvin Johnson. No, I don't think he's going to be that. But I do think that he was picked 7th overall for a reason. And I think that the Dynasty community is really sleeping on him right now. And I'll take him narrowly over Dalvin Cook. And if you ask me tomorrow, I might change my mind on that.
Yeah, I understand completely. I would say if I were building a team based on what I have here and all of the running backs I've taken, instead of this being just being a 3-person mock, I would have looked that way as well, or maybe to Doxson or Parker. But I'm not building a team, so I'm just going to take the guy that I think is best, and that's going to be Tevin Coleman. And I'm not a Tevin Coleman fan. I want that to be very clear, and I haven't been for a long time. But there's trouble brewing in that contract situation with Devontae Freeman. Ooh. Even if Freeman is brought back, which I still think that's going to happen, but it just the fact that it hasn't been done yet, there hasn't been much talk about it, that worries me. I think that Coleman, much like Henry, is in a position where maybe he's the lead back very soon in a good offense and a good rushing attack. I'll take a risk on that, even if I'm not a huge fan of the player. They like him. They figured out how to use him. And so I'll go ahead and take a chance on Tevin Coleman.
So at number 20, I'm going to actually take a guy who Ray just mentioned. But before I do that, I just want to say, and you guys can go ahead and confirm, when you pick or right now, I haven't even been tempted to go quarterback yet, even though we have a couple of good players like Winston and Mariota.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I just like I like the talent that's here at the rest of these positions. And I'm going to go ahead and take Devontae Parker. And Devontae Parker, he's a unicorn. This is insane. Like he I think is the only in recent memory young first round college stud who improved between years 1 and 2, who fell about 40 ADP spots. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I understand that they brought back Kenny Stills and they brought in Julius Thomas, and you could say, hey, that's not good for his immediate value, but maybe they brought back Kenny Stills because they think Leonte Carew sucks. Yeah. Maybe they brought in Julius Thomas because they got him for the price of a handshake.
How dare you talk about Leonte Carew?
I'm just throwing it out there, So Devontae Parker, he had about 19% of the team's targets last year. I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest maybe that bumps up to like 22 to 24%. Again, this guy has been an off-season hype all-star. I was actually reading like the headlines, like the last 4 headlines on RotoWorld, and it was coaches expect him to blow up. He's going to have a gigantic year, blah, blah, blah.
Gaze has been hyping up everybody. I feel like I get a Dolphins RotoWorld blurb like every 5 minutes.
We have I imagine all of the recent texts in our group chat are just laughing about all the future Hall of Famers that are currently playing for the Dolphins, because there was a press conference with Clyde Christensen, their offensive coordinator, in which he'd said something like incredibly positive about literally every player on their offense, literally every single one of them, and including Jermon Bushrod. Like I'm talking about, he went down the list. So yeah, some salt is necessary for some of this stuff.
The meme of the guy pointing to his head and says, you can't have blah, blah, blah. You can't have a new undefeated team if it's the same team that went undefeated before. So, Parker here at 20 out of 24, he was like, probably the 104 to 106 range in his rookie draft.
I had him as the 103 personally, but I was higher on him.
And again, I don't know what it is, but he's just this weird guy who got better and lost value. So,
he actually went late first in a lot of drafts after, I forget which injury it was, but it was like reported right around this time, his rookie year. And he fell really hard. I'm going to take Dalvin Cook, and I'm very surprised that I got him. I actually want to ask you two guys, and I'll start with you, Eric. Like, why did you let Dalvin Cook fall this far?
You took Ajayi here?
Yes.
Why did I let Dalvin Cook fall? He was probably going to be the next guy that I took, because I let him fall because there's a lot of good players on the board. Honestly, it's no slight against Dalvin Cook. I don't think he's quite as good as the other rookies in this draft class. And I think that was bared out in his testing, which, take it or leave it, his testing was terrible. And he fell a little bit in the NFL draft. He fell to pick 40, I think, where these other guys were being taken in the first round. Again, Mixon is obviously a unique situation, as you would put it, Carl. So it's no slight against him. He probably would have been my next pick, but I just like these other guys more.
Ray, what are your feelings on Cook? And then you could transition into your last pick.
Yeah, that would have been my next pick too. The thing about him is first of all, this is not a Latavius Murray thing. I want to be very clear about that. They can be out of the Latavius Murray deal next year for basically nothing. It's like $1.2 million in dead cap. That it doesn't matter at all. They're going to be out of that Murray deal soon. The first thing is, I don't think I am as high on the player Dalvin Cook as a lot of other people are, and so that means that in most drafts I'm just not going to end up with him. And like we talked about with DeMarco Murray, I could be 100% wrong on that. So that's just, you got to take a stand somewhere. And on the other side of it, this situation's not great. This offensive line is still not good.
Right.
They threw money at it. They got Riley Reif. They got Mike Rimmers on the outside. They got Pat Elflein, I believe is how you say it, at Ohio State. but it's still not great. I just think there's a lot going on there, and I'm willing to let him slip behind those other running backs as rookies. And as I said before, I am going to take rookies later than everybody else anyway. So it's just kind of a confluence of all of those things. Speaking of people I should take later, that's not a good segue, but I'm going to keep rolling through it, is Josh Doxson, who I love. Absolutely love Josh Doxson. This is all a talent projection. It is not a good idea to be high on players who lost their rookie season to injury. And even though he had, 2 catches, that's still basically a lost rookie year.
One of those was a really good catch.
Really good catch, yeah. He averaging, 33 yards a catch for his career, something like that. So I understand that this is not a good decision, but this is all a talent projection. Terrell Pryor came in. He's there. He's probably going to be he's definitely going to be the number one. They only gave him a 1-year deal. It's only $6 million. That's not certainly guaranteed number one kind of money. It certainly doesn't mean that he's going to be there in the future. Crowder is a serious threat for targets, but they play different roles. I think there's still an avenue to production this year for Doxson, and if he's the player that we think he is, certainly moving forward, there's an avenue there.
Yeah, and for my last pick in this exercise, this is a little bit of a dart throw as well, but very similar to Josh Doxson, an incredibly small rookie year sample size. That's CJ Prosise. I just love what he can do as a pass catcher. I think he has the ability to just be a souped-up Danny Woodhead at his worst-case scenario, assuming he stays healthy, which I know is huge. People are talking about Eddie Lacy. That's a 1-year contract. I'm not worried about Eddie Lacy.
And you're a Lacy fan, too.
I am a Lacy fan, and I'm similarly, you can call me Michaela Maroney because I'm not impressed that he can lose 5 pounds every month. That's a great feel-good story and all that, but I'm like, dude, you're a professional athlete and you're hitting the bare minimum. That is actually a little bit worrisome for me that, he was probably weighing in at 249.8 today when he needed to hit 250. So I like Prosise. I think he can have a theoretical Christian McCaffrey, David Johnson pass catching upside.
Almost like a theoretical upside.
A very theoretical upside. And so, yeah, he'll be my pick there. I think he could be PPR gold down the line, and I'm just shooting for upside here.
All right, and I'm wrapping it up. There's a lot of good players still left. This is to the point to where you could go a lot of different places. Winston and Mariota are on the board. You could mention Dak Prescott, yep. Sterling Shepard still on the board, Kevin White, who we talked about earlier, Cam Meredith, Ty Montgomery, Alvin Kamara, who might be this year's CJ Prosise, Brashad Perriman, who we talked about earlier, Hunter Henry still on the board. I prefer a couple other younger tight ends to him, OJ Howard. But the one player I'm going to go with, another guy that I think is being overlooked, largely due to size, and is being overlooked despite draft capital, is John Ross, selected 9th overall this year by the Cincinnati Bengals, the fastest guy ever to run in the combine. Now, could you imagine if he was the tallest guy ever to run in the combine? He would be the consensus 101. Yep. But no, he's only the fastest guy ever to run the combine, and he's not Philip Dorsett, even though I like Dorsett. He's not Tavon Alston. That's not who he is. He is an uber athlete all around. It's not just speed. He is a complete receiver, and he's not as short as what many people think. I think he's 5'10", 5'11". I think he's being severely overlooked here.
I think his hopeful upside is T.Y. Hilton is a guy I would compare him to, a speedster who can actually run the route tree. I will say additionally, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not going to speak to his injuries. There is the little bit of worry about the one-hit wonder, but that's not the be-all, end-all. I think that's a fine pick here.
Ray, I want to thank you for coming on tonight.
Hey, no problem. Can I just mention one player that nobody mentioned?
No. Nope.
Paul Perkins?
No, I said no. Oh God! You just got a best friend in Jesse Patterson.
Jesse's bat signal or his bulldog signal just went up basically.
So we have a writer. I don't know if you've talked to Jesse before. We have a writer on our team, and he is in love with Paul Perkins as far as value goes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. I mean, the situation, the team, the offense, that's a problem. We can say that all. But if you're talking about role, and I think talent, I liked Perkins last year when he was coming out. I think that's a great situation. And we kind of just you mentioned 10 other people before we got to him.
Yeah.
So I think there's some value there.
As well, the one guy you didn't mention, he would have actually been my next pick, is Amir Abdullah.
Yeah.
I could see him also, if he can stay healthy. Again, there's your caveat, but he was a big offseason winner.
Yep,
well,
absolutely.
Since you guys are giving honorable mentions, I want to give one to a guy that I talked about earlier, and that's David Njoku. He is somebody that I would consider around this spot. All right, well, Ray, we're a little disappointed you still don't have your Monopoly picture up behind you, but we are not disappointed in having you on the show. You're great as always.
Oh, I really appreciate it. And anytime. Let's not have it be so long next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can follow Ray at RM Summerlin. Obviously, check out his work at Roto World. I feel like I don't need to tell people to go to Roto World, but if you're not doing that already, go do that. You can follow Eric at EDH_27. Notice how Ray does not have an underscore in his Twitter name. That is the correct way to do it. You can follow me at Carl Safchik and tweet us at Dynasty One Podcast on Twitter. Let us know how you feel about Eric using running train when referring to Pierre Garcon.
Shameful.
Running train on the 49ers offense. And everybody, have a good week. Thank you for listening. All right.